That moment when you record an entire ed puzzle and realize your microphone has been turned off the entire time. We're back at it again. Welcome to chapter 3. We are in unit 2, talking about the living world. So let's talk about our ecosystem ecology today. Starting things off, what exactly is an ecosystem? Everything that we're talking about when we're getting into our ecosystems unit, the main thing that we're going to keep coming back to over and over and over and over and over again is that all the components of our ecosystems are interrelated. One change at one level of an ecosystem is going to affect all the other systems, whether it's a trophic cascade or whatever it may be. Another thing that we're going to be talking about in ecosystems is that we're looking at a blend of both living and non-living factors. So I'm looking at the biotic factors, all my living things such as plants and animals and bacteria, but we're also looking at the abiotic components as well. So my pH of the soil, the temperature of the area, I'm looking at the rocks, I'm looking at the sunlight, the climate as a whole. When we get into our future units, we'll talk about climate as well, and talk about how that plays into the biomes of the area, because depending on what kind of mix I have of both living and non-living factors, those biotic and abiotic factors, that's going to tell me what kind of ecosystem I end up with. All right, so let's get into our ecosystems today. We're going to start things off with something that may be a review. So, hey, that's always exciting, but it's something familiar. All right, let's talk about photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is only occurring via my producers. They're also known as autotroph, auto meaning self. So these are individuals that are producing their own energy source. Now, producers are incredibly important because if you think about it, all the energy that we need as an entire society, as an entire world, comes from the sun. Thank you, sun. But the plants are those middlemen. Right now, as a human being, I don't have any access to that energy. I can't just go outside and like photosynthesize, right? I need a way to take the sun's energy and get it into me. That's where our plants come in. The plants take that sunlight from the sun, convert it into an energy, and makes it accessible for all the other organisms in the entire world. So thank goodness for plants. They're going to go through this process called photosynthesis to make that energy available from the sun. Only plants do this. The other process, cellular respiration, is done by all organisms. Goodness gracious, people get tripped up with this every year. But respiration occurs in the mitochondria. Every single eukaryotic cell, plant or animal, has a mitochondria. So all organisms go through respiration. Plants too. Plants do both photosynthesis and respiration. Might be a question on that in just a little bit. The respiration process is how we actually take that energy from the plants and convert it into molecular energy, usually in the form of ATP. We're going to talk a little bit, I'll have a graphic in just a second so we can walk through how this photosynthesis and respiration process, how those two kind of interrelate together. All right, so we got two things going on here. Got photosynthesis at the top, respiration at the bottom. Photosynthesis, we're taking in the sun, their light energy, and converting it into chemical energy. Chemical energy in the form of glucose. Where plants, I always think about, if you're trying to think of what are my reactants or my starting materials for photosynthesis, I always say, if I came up to you and I said, here's a plant, I need you to take care of this plant, what are the three things that you're going to make sure that plant has access to? You're going to make sure it has sunlight. You're going to make sure it has access to carbon dioxide. I can breathe on it or something like that. And you also want to make sure that your plant's getting water. So those are my three ingredients I need for photosynthesis. In return, thank goodness, plants are producing oxygen and also glucose. In respiration, we now take that glucose and we're going to utilize it for respiration. Hint, 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 performed by all organisms. Some of you are still going to get it wrong. Don't do it. Be better than like all my previous people. Okay, so we've taken that glucose. We're also breathing in oxygen, and then we utilize this food energy and turn it into molecular energy in the form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. We'll also are producing two waste products, carbon dioxide and water. The way that I remember this is just put your hand in front of your face, exhale, rub your hands together. You just blew out CO2, right? When you do that, you should feel a texture, right? You're also breathing out moisture. So that's to help you remember that one of the other waste products, when I'm releasing that CO2, is also going to be water. Those two products, carbon dioxide and water, then feed in to start photosynthesis, and the cycle continues again. Oh man, we got a joke. What happens to a frog's car when it breaks down? It gets towed away. All right, you guys did an amazing job reviewing food chains when we did our Gore and Gosa activity in class. So just kind of going through that one more time. We got our producers at the bottom. They're the ones taking the sun energy, making it available for the rest of our food chain. After that, we have our primary or first consumers. They're the second trophic level, but we still call them primary because they're the first consumers. They're the first things eating anything else. Our primary consumers, such as our zebra over here on the left, these are going to be my herbivores, my plant eaters. Secondary consumers, second thing eating, these are going to be my carnivores or my omnivores, depending on what it is. So they're the second things, the ones who are actually eating the herbivores. And then finally, we have our tertiary consumers after that. What we were just looking at is a food chain. The food chain is very helpful because it is linear. I'm able to see that sequence from producer all the way up to secondary, tertiary, quaternary consumer, but a more realistic way because, well, the more realistic way of looking at this is the food web. Because I mean, think about it. Like as a human being, you don't eat the same thing every day. You're not going to eat a hamburger every single day. Well, maybe that'd be a good life. Or you're not going to eat broccoli every single day, right? You're going to be eating something different every single day. That's realistic. And that's what our ecosystems are like too. All animals have multiple types of prey and multiple types of predators, things that they're eating and things that are eating them. So our food webs, like the one pictured here, is much more realistic, right? We're taking into consideration all the interrelated things that are happening and how all these different organisms react and interact together. One thing I do want you guys to pay attention to, like look at my lion here, my hyena. A lot of these have multiple dots, and I can see that on my key on the left-hand side, the dots correspond to an individual's role. So not all organisms are one thing. Not all of them are only secondary consumers or only primary consumers. It depends on where they fall, right, along the food chain. Where am I starting at and how I follow through the flow of energy is going to tell me what an individual's trophic level is at any given time. So this hyena could be a primary consumer, but he also could be a secondary consumer. It depends on where this hyena is getting its energy and how we follow that flow through the ecosystem. Though at the end of time, all that energy is going to end up at one of three people. Now, these are my unsung heroes. These are the ones like the heroes. Not all heroes wear capes. Our scavengers, our detrivores, and our decomposers. Goodness gracious. They are like the backbone of our ecosystem. So once the energy flows through from the sun to my producers, all the way up the food chain, then it's just stuck there. And if we didn't have these guys to recycle, we would just have all these waste products left over. But there's rich biomolecules in those living tissues of organisms, even when they're dead. All the biomolecules, all the molecular compounds, we need a way to return those back into the environment, return them back into the soil. That's where my scavengers, my detrivores, and my decomposers come in. My scavengers, think large animals, hyenas, and vultures. Detrivore, I always say that there's two I's in detrivore, detrivore. I don't know what I don't know that. So detrivores, I think about insects. Okay, so my earthworms, my dung beetles, my little roly-polies. We're going to get some roly-polies in a little bit for our eco columns. And then finally, we have our decomposers. Again, we're taking all this organic material and energy and returning it back. Otherwise, like not to be morbid, but there would just be like dead plants and dead animals everywhere. And we don't want that. So thank you guys. All right. Now this might be a little bit new. So buckle up if this is completely new. There's two ways that we can think about how much energy is available to my ecosystem based on how much came from the sun originally. It's the GPP, the gross primary productivity, and the NPP, the net primary productivity. The GPP gross is the total amount of energy available to my ecosystem that is in my producers. Okay, so the sun shining down, sun shining down. The plants take that energy, turn it through the process of photosynthesis into chemical energy. That total amount of chemical energy after photosynthesis is my GPP. But plants don't work for free, right? They got to take a little cut themselves as well. So what happens is plants, after they go through photosynthesis, they're going to use some of that energy for themselves. They're going to use some of that energy by going through respiration as plant individuals. And then whatever's left of that energy after the plants have taken their cuts, that's the NPP. So it's the GPP minus how much energy the plants need for themselves, how much they utilize on their own, okay? So to kind of visualize that again, the NPP, a smaller number, it's a fraction of the GPP, the total amount of energy created from photosynthesis in a given area. So the GPP subtracted by the cut that the plants take, the respiration that the plants go through themselves, and that is what's left over for the rest of the ecosystem, okay? And then we get into the law of 10%. But hold on to your horses, we'll get to that. All right, visualizing it one more time. Sun is shining, yay, sun. And really, actually, only 1% of the sun's energy that's coming down onto an ecosystem is actually captured by a photosynthesis. The other 99% of all those solar waves, solar radiation coming down to my ecosystems, 99% of it is either reflected, passes through, or it's just coming down at such a huge, drastic amount that there's only so many plants and there's only so many chloroplasts capturing it. So not all of it's going to get captured in time. And so some of it doesn't get absorbed. Of the 100% that comes down, only 1% of that solar energy gets captured by plants. And that is my GPP, the total amount of energy created from the process of photosynthesis. From the GPP, 60% is the plant's cut. They need to feed themselves first, right? They got family and kids, not really, but so 60% of GPP is lost to respiration. The plants with their mitochondria that they have go through respiration. They utilize some of that energy to fuel themselves, creating ATP. So the NPP then is 40% of that 1% that was our GPP. Okay, so 40% of the captured energy is what's actually available to the rest of the ecosystems. First to my primary consumers, then my secondary, tertiary consumers, and then eventually to my scavengers. We'll go over this more in class. I know that this is new, so hang in there. We'll get it all done. All right. NPP, it then follows, is going to vary depending on where I am, what kind of ecosystem I am in. The more plants I have, the more chloroplasts I have, then the more NPP and GPP that is going to be available. So ecosystems such as my swamps that have a lot of algae, they have a lot of moss, they have a lot of ferns and palms, my swamp marshes and my tropical rainforests, like holy cow, Plantopia. There's so many plants in my tropical rainforest. Coral reefs have a lot of aquatic plants, and salt marshes have a lot of reeds. These are all plant dense areas. So these ecosystems are going to have a lot of plants, which means they're churning out a lot of photosynthesis, creating a lot of energy. And so because there's such a high density of plants, the NPP is going to be quite high. The amount of energy available to the rest of the ecosystem is going to be high compared to open ocean, deserts, tundras, areas where we have a lot less plants. Our vegetation is much more sparse. So that means there's less photosynthesis and less energy related. This is also going to tie into how many species I'm able to support. Something like a tropical rainforest that has a whole bunch of plant and a lot of energy is going to be able to support a greater amount of species and a greater amount of organisms than something that has less plant. That's why in these ecosystems here on the left, I see such a rich genetic diversity and a rich species density compared to my ecosystems on the right-hand side. We got to break things up with one more joke. Okay. Do you get it? Do not conceal if sealed. Food joke. Okay. Let's keep going. Something new as well. So we've talked a little bit about energy being available. Then if I'm looking at my ecosystem as a whole, I can also measure the energy in ecosystem as a whole in two different ways, the biomass and the standing crop. The biomass is the total mass of all living matter in a specific area. So I'm looking into consideration. I'm thinking, okay, how much organic living matter and organisms do I have in a given area? How many plants do I have? How many animals do I have? How many scavengers, detrivores? All of this is going to be influenced again by that NPP. How much energy is available? It's going to affect how many organisms I can sustain and support, which is my biomass. How many organisms are in this area, okay? If I'm then looking at it and trying to quantify this energy, this biomass in an area, I can further quantify it also by time, which is when we get into the standing crop. The standing crop is essentially a fancier version of the biomass. We're still looking at biomass, the amount of energy, the amount of mass or organic matter in a given area, but I'm now saying amount of biomass at a given time. So we're looking at how much energy is being produced in a given amount of time, which then tells me how many organisms are going to be sustained by that available energy in a given amount of time. Again, the higher the species richness, the more organisms, the more plants there are, that's going to tell me essentially how much energy I have in a given amount of time. So biomass, total mass in a given area. If I then say over how long, what duration that measurement has been, I then convert it into my standing crop. And we'll practice this more in class. Okay, let's get to something that's hopefully a little bit more familiar. Okay, sorry if you heard that email sound. Law of 10%, we'll talk a little bit about in class about how as energy changes from one form to another, we could lose some of that energy as a waste product known as heat. So you probably heard, or you might remember from biology, the law of 10%. Okay, so not all energy flows entirely in its fullness from one trophic level to another. Only 10% of the available energy at one trophic level is going to be passed to the next. The other 90% is going to be lost as heat, or it's going to be utilized by the organism itself in that trophic level. So as we follow this trophic level up from my producer to my primary consumer and my secondary consumer, I see that my numbers are going to decrease by 90%. So only 10% of that amount that we start with is actually passing from one level to another, okay? This is going to tell me ecological efficiency, which is how efficient am I with transitioning or passing that energy up from one level to the next. Why do we care? What does it even matter that we have all these ecosystems? And I promise, guys, we're getting to our last two concepts, so hang in there just a little bit longer. There's 5 instrumental values of ecosystems. This is the big, why am I in this class? Why are we talking about ecosystems? Why do we care? So there's 3 here, and we've got 2 more on the other side. So provisions. This is essentially what is the physical, manufacturable, or usable good that I can get from an ecosystem. So if I have a whole bunch of forest trees, the provisions I can get, the provisional value of this is that I can take those trees and turn it into lumber to build a house. I can take those trees and I can create paper. I can take those trees and I can make hiking sticks. These are goods that I can get from an ecosystem. If there's a lot of berries and fruits, my food crops, that's something I can utilize from that. It's something physical I can take from my ecosystems is my provisional goods. Ecosystems are also important because they are regulating. They're going to help take into consideration all my biogeochemical cycles that we'll be learning about within class, especially over the next couple weeks. And they're going to help make sure that everything is in balance and everything is fluctuating. For example, a lot of ecosystems that have plants are going through photosynthesis. Plants are then going to be taking all or a lot of that carbon dioxide from my atmosphere and extracting it. So I know a big hot topic issue that we'll talk about is global warming in our class and climate change and the rising CO2 levels in our atmospheres. So we have plants and they regulate and control those levels of CO2 by actually extracting the carbon dioxide from our atmosphere. That's the second benefit of our ecosystems. A third benefit is that they're also going to support other members of the ecosystem as well and neighboring ecosystems. So for example, a lot of my individuals in an individual ecosystem is going to be helping with pollination. They may be pollinators for one another. They're going to be natural filters. We'll learn about this when we get to our eco columns, that soil is actually a huge filter. It purifies our world. If I have, let's say, chemicals leaching into soils, as the chemicals in my soils pass through and run through my soil, the soil itself is going to be filtering and as acting as a filtration system, removing all those impurities before water from precipitation actually makes it to my aquifers and my groundwater reserves. So our ecosystems are going to help with filtration as well, and pest control. Different predators are going to affect different organisms and help kind of regulate that pest and parasite level. The last two instrumental values, this first one that I have on here, but I guess instrumental value number 4 is the resilience. So depending on how many different species I have, the diversity, all the different mutations are going to affect how able how able an ecosystem is to resist some sort of natural disaster. And that's going to be our next slide. So hold on to resilience just a little bit longer. And that can help us as well as humanity, because if I have a lot of genetic diversity, then we are able to kind of overcome a natural disaster based on the different beneficial goods that our ecosystems provide. Finally, cultural services. This is probably the most opinion-based good. This is just beauty. So the aesthetic, it's like, yes, whenever I go to a national park, I feel good because it's beautiful, it's awe-inspiring. It just provides a beauty value to our community. So that's the cultural service that ecosystems provide for us. All right, we're getting to our last couple concepts. Ecosystems can be affected by disturbances as well. So whether these are natural or anthropogenic, something that is disrupting or causing changes to my ecosystem is known as a disturbance. These can be natural, things that are going to happen no matter if there's humans on this planet or not, such as volcanoes, tsunamis, ice storms, or these can be anthropogenic, human sourced, human caused, such as agriculture. Okay, hello, eutrophication. We'll be talking about that more. Or I'm taking some land and I'm converting it into agricultural farmland. That's causing a disturbance. We're decreasing the species in that area. Air pollution, deforestation. These are all changes or disruptions to my ecosystem. When there is a disturbance, that's going to tie into effect with 2 ways that we can measure an ecosystem's response to that disturbance: resistance and resilience. Resistance is how hardy that ecosystem is. How able are they to fight off and kind of not be affected by that disturbance? So, for example, an ecosystem that has high resistance, let's say I have some sort of natural disaster, if they just carry on la-di-da, no one is negatively affected, we would say that this ecosystem, boy howdy, there was no effect. They have a very high resistance if they are not affected by a natural disaster, okay? Whereas if I have some sort of natural disaster that completely wipes out some species, that is causing some major disturbances to population levels, we would say that they had a low resistance to that environmental disaster. Let's say we have a natural disaster such as a forest fire, okay? It wipes out a lot of species. We have some drastic changes in the ecosystem. The amount of time it takes for my ecosystem to bounce back, to recover after that natural disaster, is going to be known as an ecosystem's resilience. So it's the amount of time or the rate at which an ecosystem is able to return to its original state and recover after that environmental disturbance. Now, there's actually a hypothesis that says that disturbance is good, at least in a little bit, okay? Because there is the intermediate disturbance hypothesis, which states that ecosystems that have just the right amount of disturbance is actually going to have the greatest amount of diversity and going to have the greatest amount of species richness, as opposed to ecosystems that have very low disturbances, very low disruptions, or very high disruptions. And actually, it makes sense. If I have very low disasters, everything is kumbaya, hakuna matata, everything is fine. Why would we need to evolve? Why would we need to mutate? All the species, even if they have mutations, there's nothing for evolution to favor. There's nothing for any events to kind of single out traits and cause speciation. Our genetic diversity is going to be incredibly low if everything is just hunky-dory. On second hand, if everything is just like fire and death and like there's disturbance everywhere, no one's going to be able to survive. We're going to have very little species that are actually hardy enough to get through all the craziness that's happening if we have a high amount of disturbance. So that also results in a low species richness. But if I have just an intermediate, a medium amount of disturbance that's happening in the area, this is perfect. There's just enough disturbance that certain traits can be favored over others. Evolution is able to work through this population, and we're able to have a lot of diversity in my area, but it's also not too much disturbance that it's like everyone's dying. We can see this here, whereas a predator number increases and decreases, that affects the species richness of algae. Where if there's very little predators, there's no reason for us to kind of challenge and evolve. But just the right amount of snail density, just the right amount of predator density, that's when we saw the richest amount of algae, just enough to challenge us to continue evolving. You made it to the end. Here is our riddle for today. What word in the English language, if the two does the following? The first two letters signify a male, the first three signify female, the first four signify a great person, while the entire word is a great woman. What is the word? I hope you have a fabulous day. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. I will see you guys in class. Best wishes, warm regards.